Hey folks, Matt McQueenie, Mix Minus Podcast. Long time no see, no hear. It's been over 2 weeks since I came to you with the podcast, and that was the Oscars podcast with Tim Castano and Jamie Alfano Mulhern. There you go, I said it there. Had a lot of trouble saying it on the last podcast, and it was that very thing that got the name of the last episode of that podcast, of that Oscars podcast, N is for Nancy, because I asked Tim Castano what his middle name was, and he said Nicholas, and he brought up that just hilarious story about how he was on the phone with a customer service rep of some sort going over his name, and when he said Timothy N. Castano, the rep said M or N, and he said N as in Nancy, and just how silly that is, because you could have said N as in Nicholas, obviously. But I'm burying the lead here a little bit. As was alluded to on that episode, that very night, that very Sunday night of President's Day weekend, my wife and I were going to be going into the hospital, to Morristown Memorial Hospital, to have our second child. We did not know what it was going to be at the time. It was going to be a surprise for us. Of course, plenty of people knew what it was going to be, who had dealt with us through the pregnancy, doctors and OBGYNs, and even all the way back to the IVF group, because they obviously knew what that embryo was. And so we were going in that night to have our baby. Our expectation was that we were going to have it on President's Day. And funny enough, well, cheesy enough, but I always thought this was funny. I always joked I wanted to name a child President, actually the name President, because I thought it would be hilarious all throughout school when the teachers had to say, "Is there a President McQueenie here?" And you'd have to say, "Yes, that's me." And just how they'd have to constantly say President. And everyone always says to me, "Well, that's fine, but what if it was a girl?" And I joke, "Well, a girl could be president, couldn't she? You got to think big." So I can turn that back on them. But it was kind of funny that that had always been my joke, and then here we were with the potential of having that baby on President's Day. And so we got into the hospital later on Sunday night. The check-in was around 11 p.m., which felt a little strange to be going in that late. The snow would be coming a bit, so we had to get out of our vicinity up in Sparta because snow tends to come on a little stronger there than in other places. But we had a dinner. We put our son Liam to sleep. My mom came up because she was going to be staying with Liam for a period of time, obviously until we were in the clear. And we got in the car and I said, this is a weird thing to say. I didn't have a drink that night, obviously, because we're going to be driving to the hospital, and everything doesn't have to be about drinking. I don't need to have a drink. But because I did not, I said, I could have a milkshake. So pretending for it to be about my wife getting something to eat because she would not be able to eat for a time until, at least until the baby was born, I said, let's get some desserts at the Sparta Diner. And I took that opportunity to have a phenomenally tasty milkshake, nice cookie and cream milkshake. I remember being in high school, my friends and I used to go to Applebee's all the time, and you'd get those after 10 p.m. Half-price appetizers, and I'd get the pizza sticks, and I would get an Oreo cookie milkshake. It's amazing what you can get away with the metabolism of a youngster. I mean, God, I'm drinking milkshakes and having pizza sticks always after 10 p.m. because you're going to get that deal. But I had that nice milkshake, and then we headed down to the hospital. We ultimately got ourselves checked in and didn't get to sleep till sometime around 2 a.m. and then were awoken around 6. I slept on just a horrendous cot. But again, this is not about me. The sleeping quarters for the significant male other are never very good in these situations because obviously everything is about the mother. They're the one going through the life-changing event. They are having to bring to bear their all of their mental acuity and their physical bandwidth to bear on what is just an unbelievable process. I mean, the birthing process, going through it a second time after 4 years, you just forget so much, and it's just such an intense thing. You're shocked that everybody who has a child goes through this because it's life-changing. I mean, it makes you see your spouse in a whole different way. the strength and fortitude that they show to go through that. I often think if men had to give birth, we would not have humanity. There would be no children if men had to go through that. So we got up around 6, and throughout the day, there was just kind of this feel of, all right, well, this baby, we'll probably have it in the afternoon. We'll probably have it by dinner time, which was a long way away. And we just kept going and going with time and going with time. And it just wasn't really happening. And the big number you want to get to is 10 centimeters, because that means that it's prime time for the baby to make its way out. But we got to 10 centimeters around 6 p.m. and around dinner time was when we thought we might be having the baby. And so it's just not happening. It's not happening. The doctor who had been there since 6 a.m., he was the doctor we went to, who we chose after having our miscarriage with the previous doctors, and just not appreciating how that whole situation was handled from their end. Not to blame them for the miscarriage, but just to blame to a degree for what we had to go through afterwards. So this was our new doctor, and I give a lot of credit, and I'm appreciative that he was there on the day. He wanted us to be induced on this day because he would definitely be there. And just seeing his surprise throughout the day, because it wasn't moving at quite the speed he might have thought it would. I remember he'd be coming in, he's like, I just delivered twins and you guys are still here. I just delivered this baby. And, it's delivering all day. And I remember walking through the maternity ward and just hearing those newborn cries up and down the hallways because of all the women and families giving birth at that time. And it was just this feeling of, oh my God, it's coming, it's coming. It's just this anticipation. And it wasn't happening. And so at 6 p.m., we got to 10 centimeters and we kept thinking it was imminent. It was imminent. I remembered going through this with Liam, our firstborn, and even when you started to push, it was still 2.5 hours before he came. But going through it once only gives you the feeling of how long it could take. Because I remember going through it with Liam, I was always like, oh my God, are we there? Are we here? Are we at the point? And we were so far from the point every time I thought that I almost gave up thinking about, are we almost there? On this one, I sort of understood how long it could take. It's almost like if you run a marathon. It's impossible to feel what 26.2 miles physically feels like until you do it. While you're doing it, you think you're mastering it, but each step is just a kind of new horizon. But once you do it, it doesn't make that second time easier to do it, but you sort of have a feeling of the totality of what the whole thing feels like. And it was like that with having our second child. But we got to this point, and hour after hour, the doctor would come back in and we hadn't moved. And Melanie was in pain. The epidural was kind of wearing off. And she couldn't believe she was feeling as she did, and we hadn't even started pushing yet. There would be a few times where she'd try to push and it just wasn't happening, and the doctor would walk out and he'd say, I'll come back. And then we reached the point where it was the end of President's Day, and he said, there's a problem here. And of course, going through the miscarriage, being in the midst of a pregnancy, of an active labor, you never want to hear we have a problem here, because you automatically think a problem is a problem with the baby. But it's not here. It was just a problem with the labor, with the delivery. It wasn't happening this way. And so the doctor made the call sometime before midnight that we were going to move to a C-section. He said, there's some reason this baby's not coming out this way, and we're only going to find it, the reason, when we have the C-section. So we were scheduled for C-section, and sort of the ward went into overdrive because they had to get doctors. They had to get the OR set up in the middle of this ward because they were not expecting to have this procedure. I think a lot of people who have C-sections, you kind of know you're going to do it, and you go into it. You plan the time you're going to do it. You can go in kind of fresh. You can go in, and the C-section is still going to be a difficult procedure to have to recuperate from. But if you go in knowing you're going to have it at 10 a.m. in the morning, you can come in fresh. You haven't spent a day in labor, had a lackluster night of sleep the night before in the hospital. You never get good nights of sleep in the hospital because there's always someone coming in. I kind of liken it to a sitcom where that next person is constantly walking in the door, kind of the Kramer effect. There's just always a Kramer walking in, and no matter what they say about, oh, get your rest, 2 minutes later, the next person's coming in to take your vitals, to take the baby's vitals, to do this, to do that, to check on this, to see about discharge. There's always people walking in. It's like a sitcom. And so we kind of reached this, we reached this point where we need to move forward at this time. And so my wife was completely spent, physically, emotionally, mentally, from the day of expecting labor, and it's just not happening. And so she had no food, she had no sustenance. Thank me for that dessert the night before. She will not do that. That's a joke. If she hears this, I'm sorry, I'm kidding. But she had nothing left, and she was feeling defeated, and she shouldn't. It was a necessity to do this. Thank God we have these procedures, because if she had to have that baby conventionally, it would have been another thing coming. So we get to the point where the doctor says we got to do this. And he said, we're going to find out why this baby couldn't be born vaginally. Sorry for the word, folks. Why it's not going to be able to born this way, we're going to find out when we go to a C-section. So then I get moved into a room, get scrubs put on. They begin Melanie with the process. And then at some point, they come in and get you as the dad to come in and be behind the curtain, because you don't want to see anything that's going on with the C-section. They're basically opening up your loved one and putting their organs on the side to get to the womb into the baby. It is a freaky, freaky thing. And so I get called in. I'm in my scrubs. I'm on the other side of this little awning or tent thing that's covering us from seeing what's going on. And she just keeps going, oh, ooh, ooh, like she can feel things are happening. You don't feel it, because that would be horrendous if you felt it. It's like Walking Dead level horrendous if you felt that. But you could feel things were happening. And someone almost said, oh, almost like you're at the dentist. And I'm not going to say it's equivalent, but it made sense, because when you're at the dentist, you know they're doing crazy stuff in your mouth, but the Novocaine is keeping it from being felt. And then you're just waiting for them to maybe hit a nerve. And at that point you go, ooh, and you need more. So it kind of feels like that's what it is. And the process just seems like it's going on for a long time. And you're not hearing any noises. You're not hearing a cry. And you're thinking, how can it be this long to get down to that womb? And it just got emotional. We were doing this a long time. We couldn't believe we were at this position. I felt terrible that my wife had to go through this procedure after the day of labor, and kind of preferring to have the baby the more conventional way. And here she was having a sort of on the turn of a dime, she's having to go to this procedure, which is just going to have an immense recuperation period up to 6 weeks. And you have to decide it's what you got to do. And I often think if I were in that spot, you got to do it, but you just feel kind of powerless, hopeless that you have to do it. Now you're going to hopefully get a healthy baby at the end of the line. You're going to find out why it wasn't going to work the conventional way, but it still is hard to go through, especially when you haven't eaten, when you haven't really slept. That's the kind of way you speak when you haven't slept. And so it just felt like it was going on and on and on. And I remember this OR, the lights were so bright, you felt like you were on the set of a TV show or a movie. It feels like Grey's Anatomy. And I started getting a little choked up. And then at a certain point, they get the baby out and you hear it. Now, when you can have a vaginal birth, as the husband, you're able to see them have the baby in their hand. In this case, you can't, because if you see that, it means you're seeing the entrails of your loved one, out on a table, which is awful. And so the doctors get it, and then all of a sudden it starts crying. And I remember just like bawling a little bit, because I was like, what she had to go through to get to this baby, to this second baby, and what she had to go through this whole pregnancy. It was not an easy pregnancy. It was difficult. She was nauseous all the time. She was having strange pains all over the place all the time. And it took so much out of her. It took a lot of the I don't want to say life, but it just took a lot of her enthusiasm out of her. It was a long slog. And here we were. It wasn't going to be over because she had 6 more weeks of recuperation. And we were having a baby now at 12:30 in the morning. I think that was his official time. So we were now having a child again in the middle of the morning. So Liam came at 2:30, this one 12:30. And you were now not going to be able to sleep really that night, but more than an hour or two. So it was only going to start the cycle again of being in a place where you're underslept, and that's hard to come back from on its own. It's like being jet lagged and then having a baby. So I give her so much credit, but it just got emotional. And then I remember the doctor saying, well, what do you think it is? Any guesses? And we're both sitting there going, please just tell us. We don't want to guess. This is craziness. Stop. This has been so much. And they weren't trying to they weren't trying to make us feel bad or do this to us, but it was just, we had enough. And I remember the doctor said, "It's a boy." And I just got really emotional. I don't know why. I mean, other than having it, but I got emotional because sure, I was happy to have a second boy who we named Connor James. But I was also a little sad because it meant that the miscarriage we had was a girl. Because when we went into that process, when we went to have our second child over a year ago, I guess a year and a half ago, when we went through that process, before we had the embryo implanted, the nurse said to us, the embryologist said that you have exactly the same quality. The next two embryos in the line are the exact same quality, just the difference of sex. One is a girl, one is a boy. Are you sure you don't want to choose? And Melanie said, "No, I don't want to choose. I just do it." And so we're basically able to surmise that that was a girl, because if those were the next two up and this birth ended up being a boy, it means we lost a girl. So there was a little bit of sadness there, and there was just a little bit of, I don't know, melancholy or just the process you had to go through to get to this. And I just had so much appreciation for my wife going through it. Sure, I'm there on the side, helping her through, but I'm not feeling it. I'm not feeling any of this. And the whole thing was difficult, but you end up with that child. And then they said, "Dad, come around." I had to walk around the tent and not look towards my wife, but I had to walk by her to get to the baby. And I remember I was tearing up with my scrubs on and my face mask, and I looked like I was an OR doctor myself. And it was emotional. And we found out why that baby wasn't coming out. One, he was 10 pounds, 5 ounces. And two, he was face up. So you're supposed to be face down to come out. So there were a few obstacles there that prevented that vaginal birth. So that's why we ended up at a C-section. Now, the interesting thing is we came out and we were recuperating, 1:32 in the morning. And then I heard someone say, "Oh, hey, man, how you doing?" Now, the day before, when it was President's Day, the day that we were expecting to have the baby. Early in the day, I was walking towards might have been breakfast. I was walking towards the cafe, and I got myself my breakfast. And as I was walking out of the cafe, I saw someone walk by me, and I went, "Oh, I know that guy." And it triggered in me that it was a former client from a big company here in Newark. They're a global company. I won't say it, but big company. And we had worked with them a handful of years ago on building a website for one regional version of the website or the web properties that he runs for this global company. And so I remembered him because I did a training with him and some of his coworkers on the system that this website was built in. So I did a nice training there. I got to know him a bit. And he was also someone that I thought maybe in the future I would want to talk to in a networking capacity, because he was doing many of the things that maybe I want to do someday. And so I knew a little bit more about him than maybe he did me. But so I said, "Oh, hey, man." I just called out his name. He's got an interesting name. And we got to talking, and we caught up, and I said, "Oh, I remember we were, this was actually his first child with his second wife. He had 2 children in a previous marriage or relationship. Not sure if it was a marriage." And so we happened to be there the same day. He happened to come in Sunday night for an inducement on Monday, and they expected to have their child on Monday. And so I said, "Oh, hey, we'll catch up when we get over to the maternity ward. The couple of days you have to stay when you have a baby. Good opportunity to catch up." And so that very guy, after we had our son Connor, he was waiting because his wife was going to be getting a C-section as well. They had the same kind of difficulty where it wasn't coming out conventionally. And so he said, "Oh, hey," and we got to talk, and I told him I had a son, and he was going in for his wife. And so it was this weird connection, right? I mean, you're not expecting to see this person, and here we are. Our children were going to be born on the same day, and they were born on the same day, just not on the day we both thought, both by C-section. And when you have a C-section, it means you're going to be in the maternity ward for more days in the post-birth period. I think it's 2 nights when you have a baby vaginally, and then it could be 4 nights when you have a baby through C-section. Bit more of a recuperation. And the other interesting thing is, because we moved into the next day, 12:30 a.m. for me, probably 1:30 for him. It means our day started on Tuesday, as opposed to if it was born 45 minutes earlier, that counts as the first day of being in the hospital. So we're both going to be in for the same amount of days. So it's kind of an interesting thing. And so I got to talking to him, and then we got to conversing. And so I went into this, birth thinking I'm going to put everything on hold, business, different aspirations. I've been looking to kind of spread my wings a little bit and maybe seek different pastures and opportunities and just push myself a little more. And so I was saying to myself, I'm going to put that on hold right now because I'm having the birth of my child. And then while you're putting on that on hold, life finds you. And so I'm talking to this guy. And then we got to speak, and a couple days later, I think maybe 2 days after the births of both of our sons, and we were having some coffee in the maternity solarium there, and we had a good 45-minute conversation before his wife beckoned him and mine beckoned me. And all of a sudden, he was like, hey, I'm putting out a job in my in my area here at the company. I'll keep you in mind. I'll keep in touch. And so you're sitting there going, wow, this could be interesting. Who'd ever thought that you can get networking done in the maternity ward? I mean, it's luck of the draw. And in this situation, he understands that I'm not trying to wag the dog here. It's not like I'm pretending to have a baby to get in front of him, to talk to him and to have an opportunity. It was all serendipity. And sometimes doing it that way, things happening that way, makes it more likely that it's going to come to fruition. So we shall see. Nothing is in stone in any way, but that opportunity coming out of thin air, coming out of two wives just happening to have babies on the same exact day in the same exact circumstances almost. And even back to the IVF, they were IVF. They had 2 embryos. They lost the first one. They chose a girl. I mean, there was so much connection going on here, so much connective tissue between our different stories that it was kind of flooring, to be honest. I was shocked. And so it was really interesting to come out of that. But anyway, we had our son. We got back to the maternity ward about 4:30, fell asleep, got 2 hours of sleep. And I was going to be with Melanie that day, but because we have Liam, our firstborn, who's 4, it didn't make sense, especially with the C-section in play now and how long Melanie was going to be in the hospital in comparison to how long we thought we were going to be. I was going to have to be heading back home. And boy, was that interesting. I'd be heading home in the afternoon, and I would put Liam to sleep. And it was weird because for a small period of time, I was a bachelor again. So Melanie, the baby, are at the hospital. I'm with Liam. He's pretty easy getting to bed. And then I remember just sitting there. I had 2 hours of sleep the night before. And I remember putting him to bed, and I just sat at the table, and I had some leftovers. My mom brought some really good meatballs and pasta. And I had about 4 glasses of boxed wine. And I felt great. I felt like I had everything. I felt like the world was mine. I'm the luckiest man. I have 2 boys. I have a great wife. And just everything was coming to me. I was in a moment of contemplation. I was by myself. I maybe had a basketball game on the TV. And it was just, you get those moments sometimes. Plus I had the thing where I'm happen to be talking to this potential business opportunity. And it just felt like everything was lining up. And you get those points in time where it feels like everything works. I felt like it was great to be home with my firstborn, and I was going to get a good night of sleep too. You knew that was coming. I wasn't going to be sleeping on one of those terrible hospital side beds. And so it was great. So I didn't mind staying up a bit. Melanie was getting mad at me that I was still up, as if I'm cheating on her or something at the house in my solitude. But I just kind of sat there. I just had the good wine. I mean, let's not call it good wine, but representative boxed wine. I do like black box. I find it to be a nice glass of wine. My meatballs, my pasta, and my fatigue coming on. I remember I just slept so well. I slept right up until 7. My son Liam, maybe because of how quiet the house was, which is not normal, he was able to sleep all the way till 7, and it was just a great situation. I was going to bring him to school. Then I was going to head down to the hospital, of course, getting myself a nice Cloveberry coffee. And the interesting thing was we had a big snowstorm coming around noon. So I was only able to get down there for a couple of hours, and then had to head back home to be with Liam again because it was snowing. I had to spell our nanny so she could get out in the snow. But it was a great couple of nights after a great couple of days. It was like having your day job driving to the hospital. it was interesting. My wife had some issues recuperating, nothing out of the ordinary, but just the normal kind of issues. But it's a happy time. And so, I met with that business opportunity, or not even business. It was just networking. It was just talking. It was just two dads who just had a child around the same time on the same day, just going over our own stories, how things are working, going over life. It was really nice. And so Friday came, we took Connor home and tried to acclimate him to Liam. That was always hard. That first day is hard. Now it's funny because when you have your first, everything's hard coming home because of the fear and anxiety of having a newborn. You always think everything's going to go wrong. So you wish you could look back with what you know now and how easy it is having just that one newborn, because especially in the beginning, they're compliant with everything. They sleep most of the day. They really just need to be woken up to eat initially. And even that's not that hard for the dad. You just get up, you change them, you give them to mom, and then maybe when mom's done, 30, 40 minutes in, you put them back. Hopefully they fall asleep. But you can always find your sleep. So even if you don't sleep overnight because maybe they're up a bit, they're going to sleep during the day and you catch your sleep then. When you have the second child, though, that kid, so, right when we think we're in control with stuff, and we get Connor down to sleep, then Liam comes in sometime in the 6 o'clock hour, usually on the earlier end, kicking the door in like, hey, here I am, like almost the Kool-Aid guy kicking in the door. And you got to get out of the room with him so Melanie can sleep. And I also don't want him being around the baby in the pack and play in our room because he can be a little handsy. He's not understanding. Maybe he sees the baby as a threat. You just worry about those things. It's sort of like you've put a new catalyst into your environment. You don't know how the different pieces are going to react, the symbiosis with all the different pieces. But he's been good. He's been really good. And Connor's been great too. I mean, he has his issues at night. He definitely gets up every 2.5 to 3 hours, needs to be fed. And for whatever reason at night, even after he's fed, sometimes he needs to be romanced back to sleep. It can be an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours in total that he's up. And when you're exhausted, not good. Now, one of the things I was doing, because I felt like, I'm home. I was home for 2 weeks in total. Now, the first week was almost all hospital, especially with the C-section. But when I was home, I would be like, oh, you know what? We'll eat a little earlier. We'll go to bed at 8:30. We'll try to accumulate sleep through the night. I'd have like a glass or two of wine. You got to cut that. You have a newborn, don't have wine, because it's not going to put you in a bad position. You're not drinking too much, but when you have to get up that first time after 2 hours of maybe being asleep, it hurts extra. It's like having a tranquilizer trying to get up. You got to be more on your game, and you're going to affect your well-being by doing that. So you almost have to stay a little clean, or maybe you have to have a couple drinks with lunch, and that's it. But again, why are we talking about drinking? I don't want to sound crazy with that. Not important. But sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of something to quell the nerves, to calm the mind, just to put things back in order. But yeah, he's been, he definitely gets up, and that's tough because lack of sleep is so tough. You never get caught up. And my wife, I think a lot of her issues have been just being underslept on top of the C-section recuperation, all that. But lack of sleep makes all that stuff that much worse, and it feels existential until you stem it by getting sleep. And so eventually she got some and felt better, but then the next night it went backwards. She only got like 3 hours because of how he was going. And now I'm back at work today, so she's giving me a little bit of grace by allowing me to sleep in the night because of my commute and how much I need to do going to work. So look, as long as I get sleep, I'm fine. I feel good. And everything's been pretty good, to be honest. It's been a nice thing coming home to a house with two boys. And our routines have been okay. Still bedtime with Liam's okay. We're playing a little bit here and there with how we handle bedtime with Connor because, do I let Melanie go to sleep at 8? Then I stay with Connor downstairs until he wakes and needs his first feeding, which is hopefully 10:30, 11. So Melanie gets like a 2 to 3 hour jump there. And then I go to sleep at that point. Or do we take him up, put him in the inside or the upstairs pack and play, go to sleep then together to accumulate our sleep through the night? It's hard to figure. I change day to day what I think I want to do, because the hard thing with going to bed at 8:30 is you can't watch basketball games live. You can't watch shows. It feels like the day comes to an abrupt end, especially when you've been working the whole day. with your 4-year-old and with the baby. You never get onto kind of personal pursuits at all, which is fine. I'm not saying you need to, but it does feel like one slog from morning until night where you're a little underslept. You're not doing things that are ultimately exciting to you. You're trying to just kind of entertain a 4-year-old, and you're trying to hold a baby. And, I've done a lot with audio, a lot of podcasts, a lot of listening to audiobooks or listening to magazines being read to you through apps like Autumn. AUDM is a good one. It'll read long form articles to you. So I've been doing that, just trying to keep my long form chops up and following everything. And look, you watch SportsCenter in the morning, so you get caught up on all the stories in sports. You watch maybe Morning Joe, get caught up on some of the politics. You're able to do everything you need. As long as you get your sleep, as long as you get a good coffee in the morning. Not too much coffee though, because then you go in the other direction. But as long as you're working towards parity and all that, it's all good. So yeah, we've been enjoying things. So we'll just have to see how it goes here first day with me at work. We still have our childcare in place, so that's been fine. But yeah, it's been enjoyable. I have not been as freaked out being around a newborn for the second time. You're just not worried about things. You have an understanding nature is going to take care of itself. The lungs are going to continue to breathe. They're not just going to stop breathing out of nowhere. You make sure the baby's fed. You try to quell the crying, which is tough. This baby cries hard. He's got everything into his crying. He is like A-list actor level crying. And I feel like it's a grenade going off in the middle of the night. You got to jump on that grenade to save everybody else, because that crying, I don't want it to be a contagion all the way to Liam on the other side of the house. Because Liam is holding his bargain. He's going to bed 8 until at least 6 a.m. Anything we get after 6 is kind of gravy, but I can't have that baby waking him up. And there was one night where, I don't know if it was caused by the baby or if it was just Liam, but all of a sudden Liam starts yelling out and he's like, "I want gummy bears." And it's like midnight 1. "I want gummy bears. I want lollipops." And I'm like, whoa, what's going on? So I went in there, slept with him a little bit. Let's be honest, I was kind of comforting him, but I was getting a little sleep too, until my wife came in and said, "Hey, you got to get out of there." But yeah, it's been a pretty good situation. I'm excited, and everything's going to even out. Think of all the people who have kids and they all end up back who they are eventually. There's just a period of time where you have to work through some things. You got to get these little beings to some level of flying altitude, and it can take a couple of months, maybe it could take a couple of weeks, but just be prepared. Try to accumulate your sleep. The one thing I'm missing out on exercise, but I'll tell you what, because I'm trying to keep the toddler very active, and I'm realizing now a lot of his behavior might be because he's not getting enough activity when he had bad behavior, because he needs 2 to 3 hours. I'll tell you, there are days I don't work out at all, and I'm still getting 10,000 steps every single day just doing things with this little 4-year-old. So he's getting a ton, and think about how much he needs just to sleep this 8 to 6 shift, and he doesn't have a nap during the day. So 10,000 steps for like 7 straight days and maybe 9 out of 11 days just being around him without working out. It's unbelievable. But I do need to figure out where I'm going to work out, how that's going to play itself, because you feel really selfish working out. My wife can't work out when you have the C-section, really. She can maybe walk, but she can't work out the way she wants to. So I don't want to be pushing my interests out there over her. So I don't know when to work out, though. Do I work out at night? I never have done that. Do I get up earlier to work out? That's dangerous when you're already trying to accumulate sleep with a toddler or with a newborn. It's hard. Do I just work out some point and work, go to a New York sports club or go to a place around here and just get in my time? Do you curtail your workout? That's always a given, but how much do you curtail it? What do you need? Am I getting enough? If I'm getting 10,000 steps with a 4-year-old, maybe that's good. But then you're sitting there going, let's not bring this up because it sounds a little selfish. As I said, I'm trying to change some things. And one of the decisions I made before the time of this baby, only a couple weeks before, was, you know what? I'm having trouble. I've been kind of applying to some things, big opportunities, and I had one that got real close. I had a 4-hour interview, and it's a multinational medical devices company. I had 5 hours of interviews in total, 4 hours on site, and I never heard back from them. And then I followed up, and they said the job just went internal, and I felt like this was going to be the one. It was an easy commute from where I live, which is a lot to be said because there's not easy commutes from where I live. And it all was perfect and it all came about so quickly. It all turns out, though, it was because they had an internal candidate, and you hear a lot about that in big corporate environments. They like to promote from within or hire from within because those people have been steeped in their traditions and their operating principles. And so I was maybe just the person that gave them the cover to hire internally. So it was a real downer. And the one thing I've realized in kind of looking at different opportunities, you see in a lot of the places I want to go, I either want to be in healthcare, whether you're talking about pharma, medical devices, whatever, healthcare, on the marketing side, though, not on the sales side. I want to be in one of the FANGs, which is Facebook, Apple, Alphabet, Netflix, Google. Or I just want to be in a large kind of corporation. And what you see in a lot of those job postings are MBA preferred or MBA required. And so the one thing I've done is I've taken a step back from the active applications, and I've decided I'm going to go for an MBA. It still allows me to come here to Newark. There's Rutgers Business School is right across the street from here. And it's a good business school, very good business school in the country and especially regionally. And I decided I'm going to apply. I got to be, selected and approved for the program, but I finished up all pieces of my application and I'm going to go for it because, I want to get back into school. I see all the people talking about these MBA preferred, MBA required, and maybe it's time to do that. Maybe it's time to fill out that resume at this point, 15 years after I finished college. And what you do is you go to this, you do your best. Maybe I can try to do 2 classes a semester, go to all 3 semesters in the year, and maybe finish this in 2+ years. But what happens in an MBA program, especially a good one, especially one where it's not just all online, but you get a chance to go there too, and it's right across the street, so it all works logistically, is you are given access to career services. And when you're in a part-time program, it's after 24 credits, so we're looking at maybe a year and change. And after that year, when you get access to career services, it's like a preferred job listing. It's matchmaking. It's good students get put into contact with really good opportunities maybe before the general population does. So I just decided that's something I'm going to do. I feel like it's time to change things up. I feel like I've not been moving forward, that I've been a little stagnant. You know, you have another child as well. You just feel like you got to shake some things up. You got to change your narrative. You got to make this an inflection point to be more than where you are. The one thing I can never do is feel like I'm stagnating. I always have to feel like I'm going forward in some respect in life. And so I kind of decided that I'm going to try to do that. Will I be successful? It's hard to tell. It's hard to know. But I'm going to try. And I think I'll be a different student now 15 years later. Now that I've been in the work world for the amount of time I have, now that I've accrued the expertise and knowledge I have in the work world, now that I have better time management skills, better organizational skills, maybe school will be a little easier to me now. And I kind of like the idea of coming to Newark, using that location, those logistics to my advantage, going to a good school right across the street. It's a nice gleaming building. Audible has their corporate headquarters on the top of this building. So who knows? Let's give it a shot. Let's give it a try. Let's see what happens. I'm really excited to try to kind of change my reality, change my situation. Do need to get accepted. I'm hoping I do. And I'll tell you, I mean, I was watching this RBG documentary, which is on Hulu. It did not win the Oscar I thought it would, but it was a good one. And there were points when I'm watching this, and I was watching it with my wife, and you look at Ruth Bader Ginsburg when she was coming up at a time when women were not seen as important in the marketplace, especially in law, and people didn't think they could be lawyers. And she worked so hard, and she had a very supportive husband at a time when the husbands were the ones who felt like they were the breadwinners and the women should support them. But there was a poignant moment when I was watching it, and I saw she had 2 young children, and she'd be at school, she'd come home, she'd put the children to bed, and then she would work from like 8:30 p.m. until like 2:30 in the morning. And just that discipline, watching her work at her desk, And watching her work the way she does right to this day, even at this age, she apparently will get very little sleep in the week and just work all night, all day, and then just get all of the sleep catch up on the weekend, just like sleep the whole weekend like a hibernating bear. But seeing that, it struck something in me. I come home, I do personal pursuits at night, I'll watch a couple of TV shows, I'll watch some Netflix documentaries, I'll listen to some stuff, I'll talk to my wife. But, you kind of take for granted that that's what that time is. But when I saw her using her time to better herself professionally, and to even having 2 children and having a husband and still being able to work through that, that's a challenge that I kind of find exciting. I never had that challenge, obviously, when I went to college the first time. But maybe it's having the challenge, maybe having the context, now having the knowledge of 15 years going by, that it makes me excited about the challenge. So that's what I'm going to kind of do. Kind of on a related business note, I've been reading Barbarians at the Gates. It's a book from the 80s, late 80s. There was even a TV movie made about it, maybe HBO. But it was sort of the beginning of this like leveraged buyout scene where companies would try to inflate share prices by buying other companies with debt, and then kind of assuming the new companies in hopes of the diversification with the mergers and the purchases, creating more value for the stock in general. And it's a really highly referenced book in the business world, and it's a good book. It's a good page turner, and I've liked it too because it's interesting to hear about business in like the 80s when there's no technology really, and it's all kind of it's all kind of ideas come up in boardrooms, and I just like the idea of technology not being in the mix like it is now, and just how life was only 30 years ago, right? I mean, we're looking at 89 being 30 years ago, but one of the really neat things in this book, and again, I'd recommend it. I saw it one day on BookBub for $2, so I just made the purchase. But there's a connection to my town in Sparta. So the kind of star of the book is someone named Ross Johnson. He's the famed CEO of RJR Nabisco. And there's a point where he actually buys a palatial estate in Sparta, New Jersey, maybe 2 to 3 miles down the road from me, off of the road that I live on. And so this is the thing I love in this book, this little passage. In 1981, Ross Johnson, famed CEO of RJR Nabisco, purchased the property, mentioned in New York Times bestseller Barbarians at the Gates. Johnson continued to upgrade his own lifestyle, buying a huge French chateau-style house with a 40-acre estate in Sparta, New Jersey. He attempted to commute via helicopter to Nabisco's headquarters in East Hanover, New Jersey, but was thwarted when town fathers repeatedly refused helicopters to land there. Johnson surrounded himself with the rich and famous, Bobby Orr, Dinah Shore, and Burt Reynolds amongst those, throwing massive parties at the estate, including the 600-guest RJR Reynolds Nabisco merger party. Guest Pierre Trudeau, 15th Prime Minister of Canada and father of the current Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, christened the property Chameau, meaning warm mountain. It's pretty amazing, right in your town. And it's cool to be reading this like famous book about big business in the 80s. And this guy tried to live out here in Sparta. Kind of neat. The last thing, I saw a documentary sometime in the last few weeks, pretty good one on HBO, again, about going back in time, especially in New York, and watching society in the 80s, 70s, I think mostly 70s, 80s, but there was a documentary called Deadline Artists on HBO, and it's about Jimmy Breslin and Pete Hamill, who were sort of the voices of the city through the many years when the New York Post and the New York Daily News and sort of the working class writers sort of defined the voice of the city. And it was a really good documentary. Just a great snapshot in time. Newspapers were important. Columnists were really important. They were interjected into many stories. They were sort of the competing beats uncovering the city. Really good writers. And it was just, it was an interesting way to kind of have a magnifying glass on the city through this story. I would definitely recommend it. Deadline Artists on HBO. You know, documentaries are just, they're tremendous. It's a good
maybe 2-hour commitment sometimes, and you just pick up so much from them. So many tidbits that help you in your everyday that are sometimes better than just seeing a movie or a TV show. Why don't we call it there? I got a few other things to talk about, but we're at 45 minutes already, and I just wanted to kind of give a state of the union on where things have gone in the last couple of weeks on the birth of my child Connor, and just on a couple of related notes. We gotta keep these things going as best you can. It gets tougher with 2 kids, I'll be honest, but I'd like to do the 1 or 2 a week and see where we go. So thanks, folks. I'll talk to you soon.